The Girlfriend by Tim Kelly. To J.K. for all the pleasure. Not that way, this way. She took my arm and steered me away from the town centre in the direction of the river. My ex hangs out down there. Oh, I said, a mixture of fear and jealousy forming in my heart. He's unstable, violent. Best avoided then, I said, with a nervous little laugh. She looked directly into my eyes and added firmly, best avoided. He wasn't able to let me go. He still thinks I'm his girlfriend. Of course she was too beautiful for me. I knew that from the start. Zoe's hair was auburn and glistened golden in the sunlight. Her eyes were deep, honey brown and wild. And her lips, pale rose to soft strawberry. Even now I shiver when I think of them. Don't worry, she said, and smiled as we entered the riverside bar. We're going to have a good time. Yes. Mine's a double vodka. I'll be waiting outside. Zoe stepped onto the balcony that ran along the riverside, and I went and bought the drinks. When I got outside, she was sitting at a wooden bench with a few other people she evidently knew. There was a girl with dyed purple hair and an earring through her nose, a haggard-faced young man in a khaki jacket who was writing something in a little notebook, and next to him, a giant of a man with a cut-off t-shirt designed to reveal his enormous muscles. As I placed the drinks on the table, I noticed that the word love was carved in bright red into the big man's left bicep. Two lines curved down and met beneath it to form a heart shape. Along his inside forearm was tattooed Pale Warriors. This is Norman, a friend, Zoe said, introducing me. This is John, also known as the Prince, she continued, pointing at the sickly scribbler. Lily, waving at the nose ring. And this is Big D, who likes to call himself the King. She smiled sarcastically at Big D. The man with the tattoos held out his right hand. Got you, Norman, he said. Welcome my manor. As he squeezed my hand, Zoe added, my ex. My hand went limp. On his right bicep there was a picture of a skull. Beneath it, in black, was carved the word death. I smiled a little too hard. John put down his pencil, wiped the dew from his brow, and began rolling a joint, which he proceeded to place between his thin pale lips and light. After taking a few puffs, he passed it to the girl. She took a drag and handed it on to Zoe, who puffed away happily. A sweet smell filled the air. Then it went to Big D, who drew on it deeply and blew the smoke out of his nose, his nostrils widening aggressively as he did so, raising the image of a bull in my mind, a big, snorting bull, steam streaming from its snout, getting ready to charge. Big D pulled hard on the spliff, which had now been reduced in size by 3/4. A poisonous-looking brown and yellow stain formed around its end, which seemed to flow naturally into Big D's dirty nails and fingers. He passed the filthy butt to me, wet with saliva. No thanks, I don't, I waved. Oh, he doesn't, Big D said, looking at the others. Big D thrust it forward again. Come on, Norman, have a toke. I felt I had no choice. I put the dirty thing between my lips and sucked in, coughing involuntarily as the smoke filled the cavity of my mouth and lungs. Good on you, Norman, Big D said, and laughed, giving me a huge heavy pat on the back, which made me cough some more and spill my drink. So we know what you don't do, Big D said. What do you do? I'm an accountant, a trainee to be precise. I'm on the summer placement of my degree course, so a student more accurately, though I'm doing the job of an accountant at... Impressive, Big D interrupted. He didn't sound very impressed. John, who had already lit another joint, nodded as if in agreement, though his woe-begone expression and vacant stare suggested he was lost in some other world. And what do you do, Big D? I asked politely. Anybody that pay me to, he said loudly, snorting out a guffaw. Ah, I responded nervously. Zoe downed her vodka. Drink up, she said. I took a swig of my beer and placed the half-empty glass on the table. Zoe stood up. Be seeing you, she said, and bent down to give Lily a hug and a kiss. Going so soon? Big D grabbed Zoe's hand. She snatched it away and stared aggressively at him. Big D jerked his thumbs at me.
No!
There was a pause.
Man hasn't finished his beer.
I waved as if it wasn't important. Zoe stepped in front of me, picked up my glass and downed it in one, all the time staring at Big D. "Come on," she said, and taking my hand, pulled me away from the table. We walked rapidly on down the side of the bar, past a couple of small moored boats, and on towards where the river widens to form an estuary. We continued up the side of the hill until the sea appeared into view, the evening sun sparkling on the water. The climb was steep and I was breathing heavily. Just before we reached the top of the cliff, she pulled me into a little alcove. And then she kissed me. I wasn't ready for it. A kiss more hungry than passionate. Her lips were like the inside of ripe fruit, liquescent. I pulled away momentarily and uttered, "Steady on." She took no notice, caught up as she was in her own desire. She grabbed at my trouser belt, unbuckling it, and thrust her hand into my pants. I felt like stammering, "Help!" but was so excited I just leaned back against the tree roots that stuck out of the hillside. And then she bent down and took me in her mouth. The last rays of sunlight fell across her face. She had loosened her own trousers and was rubbing herself and moaning. Her head moved up and down, and as the sun penetrated her hair and poured onto her wet lips, a haze of rose and gold in the dying light, I came inside her mouth, a moist and delicate strawberry. After a moment, she lifted up her head and laughed. She placed my hand between her legs. She rubbed and jerked herself up and down against my fingers, groaning loudly. And then her face took on an ethereal expression, and a sweet moan emanated from deep inside her, spilling from her lips as she came. We buttoned up and walked to the top of the hill, and sat and stared out at the sea as the sun fell beneath the water. She looked at me and sighed. Tears formed in her eyes, so I kissed them gently, once each and then once more. She laid her head on my shoulder. I'm sure to an outside observer it would have all looked very beautiful, two lovers at twilight by the ocean. But I couldn't help feeling distinctly uncomfortable, as if I'd somehow been raped. The next day at work I didn't function. I couldn't get Zoe out of my mind. I'd always prided myself on being a good employee and had intended to make sure I'd be wanted back when I'd finished my degree, but Zoe was the start of the end for me at Bell and Dam Chartered Accountants. Income and expenditure sheets, credit and deficit tables, liquid and capital assets, input, output, numerical data that had been fascinating to me the day before seemed like blurred scribbles on a page, indecipherable graffiti. All I could think of was the little O of her soft strawberry lips. Somewhere in the distance, someone said something. I felt a tap on my shoulder.
"A penny for them."
The withered face of Mr. Sedgwick, the commercial director, was looking down at me. I straightened. I hadn't seen him coming.
"You won't get any sense out of Norman,"
Marcus informed the director.
"He's been staring out of the window all morning."
I scowled at my colleague on the adjoining desk. Marcus Knight was the same age as me, but having failed to get into university, had been working here longer. He was still only a trainee, however, and no doubt always would be. Mr. Sedgwick looked down from my computer screen to the papers on my desk. The accounts were covered in doodles, dozens of pairs of badly drawn lips.
"Norman,"
he said, holding up a sheet of paper.
"Get a grip."
Marcus laughed out loud.
"Button it."
The director turned on Marcus. That wiped the sarcastic smile off his pasty face. Marcus coughed and looked away. Mr. Sedgwick thrust the sheet back down on top of the others on my desk.
"And woe betide if I catch you at this again."
I looked up at him. His eyes stared sternly into mine, a look of horrid warning round his open mouth. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir," I said. As soon as Mr. Sedgwick had gone, I turned back to my work and forced myself to concentrate. External audit, right. Instructions, complete the requisite spreadsheets, which were? Just as my mind was finally focused, Marcus called,
"Look out!"
and a paper aeroplane hit me on the side of the head and landed on my desk. I gave Marcus the finger and was about to throw the plane back when I noticed something drawn on the paper. It looked like a set of toes. I opened the wings, and as I did so, an image of a naked girl appeared, her legs spreading wide as the wings unfolded. At the centre was an obscene rendition of a gaping cunt. More obscene still was that emerging from the cunt was a bright red tongue. Marcus had spotted the tongue with black dots so it looked like a strawberry. It was horrible. I was both disgusted and aroused.
You worthless piece of shit!
I shouted angrily at Marcus. Marcus let out a burst of mocking laughter. This will be our place, Zoe said that evening as we entered the grotto, an old ruin on the hill above the town that had been turned into a pub. If Big D's down there, we'll stay up here. A vodka? I asked as we approached the bar. I'll get the drinks. She returned with 2 small glasses of liquor. Try this, she said, holding the glass to my mouth to let me sip. It's so sweet, I shivered and ran my tongue round my lips. It's made of honey. She took me by the hand. Let's go outside. That was the first night I fucked her. And so it was throughout the summer. The pattern was always the same. We'd meet in the evening on Elphin Street. I'd wait on a bench beneath a lamppost. When she arrived, we'd walk up to the grotto, drink, she'd smoke a spliff, and then we'd step hand in hand into the night and make love, always outside somewhere, in the open air. At the weekends it would be no different, except that I'd wander around not knowing what to do with myself till evening. Once, and only once, did she spend time with me during the day. It was a Sunday, and I bumped into her by chance as she emerged from a little seafront junk shop cum coffee house known as the Garland Cafe. Amidst the buckets and spades, frisbees and beach balls, there were hats, scarves and jewellery hanging from the rotating display stands outside the shop. What do you think of these? She asked, holding up some earrings and holding them beside her head. Beautiful. Or these? Very nice. And these? Lovely, I said, though it all looked like plastic tat to me. Which do you like best? She demanded. Those, I said, pointing at a box of silvery stuff in a display case. She peered into the case. You'll have to pay, she added gravely. So I bought her some silver bracelets and a matching hairband, which I placed on her head. As I did so, she looked at me with such a pretty smile and so much love that I kissed her, a long, long kiss, right there in front of the people outside the shop. It was very unlike me, and I was a little embarrassed afterwards, especially when an old lady gave a little clap. Zoe just laughed and, taking me by the hand, skipped along, light-footed, towards the sea. I want to ride a donkey, she said, pointing at some scruffy-looking beasts on the beach. I looked up and down the sands. Only a couple of very young children were riding donkeys, each led by an adult holding the reins. Now, Zoe, you're a little bit big for that, aren't you? Liquid immediately welled in her eyes. How childish was the thought that leapt to mind, though my heart melted, so I paid the man and helped her up. What's it called? She asked the man. Beauty. Zoe's tears were quickly replaced with smiles of joy. Despite her giddy-ups, the donkey proceeded slowly as Zoe leant sidelong and sang a strange song, her hair waving in the wind. I stood and watched her enthralled. I knew then that I would always love her, but I also had an intimation that either she or I or both had gone a little bit mad. She let me walk her back into town but didn't invite me to her apartment. I'd never been to her apartment. For Christ's sake, I didn't even know where it was. For Zoe never told me anything. She never explained. She just smiled and politely ignored my questions. But that was Zoe, light of my life, girl of my dreams. She had appeared from nowhere and for what seemed like no reason, and it was enough for me that she was there. I was happy so long as I could see her, so long as I could hold her hand, so long as I could kiss those strawberry lips and enter her body and relish that moment when she trembled to orgasm against me. And then, on the last day of summer, she did not appear for our evening rendezvous. I waited until the dark descended, and then I waited some more. I started to bite my nails. She had been late, but never this late before. I decided to go and look in the grotto, but my search was futile. I returned to our meeting place and paced up and down beneath the streetlight. I rang her mobile. I rang again and again. No answer. I got angry. I telephoned a dozen times, 20, 30, still no answer. I rang once more, stabbing at the letters on the screen. Where was she? A nagging anxiety filled my soul. How could she leave me? But of course she was going to leave me. I always knew it would happen, was bound to happen. A girl like that with me? How ridiculous, how completely implausible, how utterly impossible. I sat down on our street bench and began to cry. Deep, bitter sobs. Why have you gone and left me? I pleaded pathetically to the empty air. Have mercy, I begged to her image. And then I lay down beneath the stars and wept bitter tears from my abandoned lonely soul. I think my sobs must have lulled me to sleep, for when I awoke in terror from a nightmare, all the lights in the houses below were out and the air was very cold. I sat up and shivered. I tried to place what had startled me to consciousness, but could only picture fragmented ghost-like images. The narrative had slipped, though I promised myself if I did remember it, I would certainly write it down. What struck me most was the lack of colour. My dream was in greyed-out monochrome, the images in black and white. I shivered once more, then ceased my futile loitering and walked quickly back home.
Oh, Deedums.
Marcus patted me on the back at work the next morning.
Has little Normie been crying?
Shut up, you stupid fuck! Just shut up!
I turned on him with fury rising from my seat, fists clenched.
Calm down, Norman.
Marcus whispered, nodding in the direction of the commercial director's office. Mr. Sedgwick was standing in the doorway, staring directly at us. Marcus walked away. I sat back down. I didn't go out for a coffee break that morning. I just stayed at my desk and stared at the computer screen. Perhaps that was a mistake in hindsight, for that had given Marcus an idea.
There you go, Norman,
said Marcus, holding out a mug of tea. I turned and stared at him contemptuously.
Make sure you don't burn the table,
he added, and taking a folded-up sheet of paper from his pocket, placed it beneath the mug of tea on my desk. He turned and walked away. I put the mug to one side to look at his latest stupid prank. On top of the paper, Marcus had written, "No merci, Norman." Beneath this, he had drawn an arrow and scrawled the French word, "oeuvre." Did he think I was an idiot? I knew it meant open. I gave him another withering look, but he just smiled back, a fake innocent smile. I unfolded the paper. At the top of the page it said, "Girlfriend Kebab." Marcus had drawn a picture of a naked girl on her hands and knees being violated by two men. Both had enormous penises. One was penetrating her from behind. The girl was sucking on the other's cock, her breasts wobbling beneath it. Marcus had drawn a speech bubble from the girl's mouth in which was written, "Oh yeah, give me big cock, not Normie's little tiddler." But what shocked and disturbed me was not the obscenity of the drawing, nor the vileness of the language. It was the face of the girl. Although I hated Marcus, I had to acknowledge he had a talent for art. The face was clearly that of Zoe, and more than that, the face of Zoe as she was about to come. Had he been watching us? I wondered momentarily, before dismissing the idea out of hand. No, that's not it. A more terrible certainty crawled into my brain. He'd had her. He had fucked her. Tears rose in my eyes and I stood up distraught. Marcus let out a giggle. I just stood there looking like an idiot and cried, the paper clenched in my hand. Marcus came right up to me and with his face only inches away, whispered,
"I did warn you, Normie."
I looked directly into his eyes, a plea in mine. I waited a moment, but the plea went unanswered. And then his mouth gaped wide and he let out a raucous howl of laughter. He clearly couldn't help himself, so funny it must have been for him. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to do something. So I butted my head as hard as I could into the mocker's face. He wasn't expecting it. He let out a howl as blood splattered from his nose and he crumpled to the floor, holding his face with both hands. I gave him a kick in the stomach for good measure. "Damn you!" I screamed, and then I gave him another.
What the hell?
Mr. Sedgwick came stomping over in our direction. What the hell, I thought too, and gave the commercial director a punch in the midriff. His own momentum doubled the power of the blow and he folded in half, tripping over Marcus and tumbling to the floor. I walked straight out of Bell and Dam Chartered Accountants, listening as the groans and curses diminished. I didn't bother to look back. So I walked, and I walked. I looked for her everywhere, along the streets, inside the shops. I went into the pubs and cafes and restaurants. I climbed up to the grotto. She wasn't there. I walked along the hill path for a bird's eye view of the town. I scrambled down a slope and wandered round the backs of people's gardens. I even spied through their windows. Nothing. I sat down and thought. Zoe usually came to meet me from the area known as the Meads, between the hill and the town. So I decided I should concentrate there. I made my way down the streets in that direction till I came to a point where two roads met. This was the spot I would wait. So I waited, and I waited. One night, 2 nights, I waited for that witch, that evil bitch, that witch who had bewitched me and reduced me to a gibbering wreck, unable to do anything, unable to work, unable to study, unable to think about anything but her. And then, on the 3rd night, she came. As dusk was falling and the birds were singing their last song, she appeared, a magical fairy emerging into the lamplight, more beautiful than ever. But much to my astonishment, she just walked past me without even glancing up. Must she add insult to injury? I turned and grabbed her arm. How could you? I cried. The bird stopped singing. She looked at me, her eyes wide and sincere, her face oh so beautiful. My heart cracked once more. Norman, I should have told you. I know I should, but I felt it was kinder this way. You must have known it could never last. I love you! I screamed, shaking, my hands curled into fists. I know, Norman, and I loved you in my own way. She raised her face towards mine and kissed me on the cheek with her strawberry lips. Goodbye, Norman. And with that she turned and walked away. I stood there trembling, my fingers digging into my palms. No, you don't! I screamed and went after her. No, you don't! She began to run, but I was faster. I grabbed her from behind and pulled her down. No, you don't! No, you don't! No, you don't! There was fear in her eyes, but she raised her arm to slap me. So I punched her. Once. In the face. A spurt of strawberry red flew from her lips and fell across her cheek, staining her milk-white skin. She looked stunned and surprised and suddenly terribly sad, and her body went limp. I bent down and kissed her bloody and torn lips one last time. And then a single tear trickled from the corner of her eye, and I could not bear her sadness. So I ran into the darkness of the cold hillside, tears blinding my eyes, sobs choking my throat, not understanding what I had done, or why. Addendum. Not that way, this way. Zoe took the boy's arm and steered him away from the hill towards the central square. My ex hangs out up there. Oh, the boy uttered. He's unstable, violent. Oh, the boy repeated. Is that how you cut your... the boy asked, glancing at the scar that crossed her lower lip, making it look like a swollen strawberry. Zoe stopped and stared with sorrowful and knowing eyes into the boy's. Yes, he thought I belonged to him and imagined it would last forever. He didn't know how to let me go. Oh, deep inside, he still thinks I'm his girlfriend. The end. John Keats's La Belle Dame sans Merci. Oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sidelong would she bend and sing a fairy song. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild and manna dew, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she wept and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses 4. And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, ah, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed on the cold hillside. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La belle dame sans mercy hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam with horrid warning gape wide, and I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing.